So I'm going to be going over Macbeth's key features today and all of the basics that we need to know about the plot and all of the higher level points that we need. It will become clear as I go through. If you are doing the AQA exam tomorrow, then you will know that we are looking at the entire plot and we need to know everything about the plot, or all the key points of the plot. And then obviously we need to get hopefully level 4s and above. So a level 4 is about 20 out of 30 marks, and that's a great grade for a lot of us, and some of us are going to be pushing for those level 5s, those level 6s as well. So here we are going to have a look at Macbeth's key features. So the first key feature in the play, or the first key moment in the play, is Macbeth's description at the start. He's described as brave and noble before the audience even meet him, which establishes him as the hero and makes the reader respect him before meeting him. Now, this is important because it means that we seem to think that Macbeth will be the hero who takes us through the entire play. The play is named after him, so we expect him to be the good guy, and that's what's really important here. So that's the basic moment. The more detailed parts of this is that it creates a full sense of security, and by that I mean we are tricked into thinking that Macbeth is the noble, brave hero, which makes his downfall all the more tragic, and it shows how power corrupts individuals. What's really important is that Macbeth seemed like he was the one fighting for what's right. He fought the traitor, he killed the traitor, and yet he becomes the traitor. And that shows how corrupting power can be. So that's our first point. Then we move on to the next key point. So the basics of point 2. Macbeth then gets the prophecy from the witches. The prophecy says that he will be king. Banquo also gets a prophecy, and that prophecy is that he will be the father to a line of kings. Now, they have opposite reactions to this. Banquo's reaction is far more noble. He questions the witches. They are supernatural. He doesn't actually think they should be trusted. Macbeth starts to immediately think about how he could become king and the possibility of killing Duncan in order to become king. This shows that Macbeth is easily tempted by evil. And then when he gets a new title given to him by the generous Duncan, he believes the witches even more. So possibly suggesting he's a bit gullible here. Now, if we want to go into a level 4 and above, we can comment on the fact that Banquo starts to become Macbeth's antithesis. Antithesis is a fancy word for opposite. If you can't remember antithesis, do say opposite. He does not want to act on his prophecies. He will not act on his prophecies. And Banquo actually warns Macbeth not to act on his prophecies. He says, to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness often tell us truths. Now, what's interesting there is he says they will tell you the truth to get you into a place where you're very confident, and then they will sort of steer you towards a very harmful path by doing that. And that's what that sort of metaphor means there. This is important because it does become true. It comes true for Macbeth. They tell him all these sort of half-truths and really misleading ideas all the way through, and it actually does lead Macbeth to his harm. It leads him to his downfall. So at this point, we really do think that Banquo may be onto something, because we, as an audience in the Jacobean times, we don't trust the witches. They're supernatural. So we're sort of seeing Banquo as a more positive character here, and this is where that negative character development for Macbeth starts. Then, so the basics here. The next point. After this, Macbeth's kind of having some doubts about committing regicide, which is a way to say killing the king. So it's sort of the sin of killing the king. But Lady Macbeth actually manages to convince him, which shows the reader that Lady Macbeth, or the audience, sorry, that Lady Macbeth is the dominant character, and it shows Macbeth is really, really weak. Macbeth's character development is continuing to be very, very negative because he's no longer the brave soldier and he seems weaker than his wife. And we all know at the time women were seen as the weaker sex. Now our level 4 and above. Lady Macbeth's dominance over Macbeth emphasises that weakness, Again, look at typical Jacobean gender roles. She was not meant to be dominant. She was not meant to have the power, and yet she has that dominance over Macbeth, and she convinces him. Lady Macbeth and the witches both manage to tempt him, which shows he's easily led by females and really does get the audience to question how masculine he is, how strong he is, if he believes these women, and he allows these women to tempt him and trick him into doing things that they want him to do. Then we move on to 4, my point 4. Now, if you need to pause this and you need to make some notes, you need to sort of put down your ideas, please do. 4, the basics. Duncan then arrives at the castle. He's polite, he calls them noble, he showers them with compliments, he's excessively nice. As an audience, we like Duncan. He seems lovely. However, this is dramatic irony. Dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters do not know. We know that Lady Macbeth and Macbeth are planning to kill Duncan. So this creates a lot of tension at this point. And we know they're plotting to kill him. And Shakespeare does this to make their actions seem even worse and to make them seem like just evil people, because look at Duncan. How amazing is he? How wonderful is he? And how generous and lovely has he been to them? They seem very ungrateful. Our level 4 and above comes from saying that Duncan is presented as a benevolent ruler, and that's really important for kings and leaders at the time. So if a question comes up about kings and leaders, we need to sort of start to think about how Duncan is actually a very, very nice leader, but perhaps he is too trusting. He tells Macbeth and he tells Banquo that he's going to nurture them, and he compares them to plants, and he says he will harvest them. So he knows that putting his effort into them will get him benefits back, but also be really good for them. And that really juxtaposes Macbeth, who is a terrible leader, who only takes from his subjects for his own gain. So it does show him to be that selfish leader to Duncan's very generous leader. And there's that juxtaposition there, which is a way of saying opposite. So they're very opposite as well. Point 5. Duncan's then murdered. So Macbeth goes through with it. But Lady Macbeth is really angry because Macbeth runs away from the scene with the weapons. This shows that Macbeth is quite weak again. He doesn't carry out the plan, does he? Macbeth has to run away and get his wife's advice, and so Lady Macbeth has to fix it. She goes back, she plants the daggers, and it shows her as the stronger character. Now, if we want a level 4 and above, we can say that once again, Lady Macbeth's dominance is clearly presented. Macbeth is weak again in comparison to her, so she seems like the dominant character. Now, this shows that Macbeth does have some genuine remorse. He is really struggling with what he's done, but Lady Macbeth doesn't. Now, there is a role reversal later in the play, because Lady Macbeth doesn't seem to be able to forgive herself, but Macbeth becomes unbothered, and we'll go over that at a later point. But remember, this is the point in the play where Macbeth says he will never be able to wash the blood from his hands, and Lady Macbeth says, oh, a little water will sort that. So it's really interesting here how Lady Macbeth is so dominant and is not fazed by the blood. She doesn't have that typical sort of feminine sensitivity. She's okay with everything, and she just wants to get on with what they're doing. Then we have my point 6. The nobles say there was a huge storm in the night, and that symbolises chaos that's caused by Duncan's death. So the weather is used to show how terrible things have become in the country. Duncan's sons both flee because they think they could be the next to be murdered. And that actually shows that they're quite wise to us, because we know that Macbeth wants to become king, so he's going to have to get rid of them because the crown passes to them. But it makes them look very guilty, so everyone suspects them, and everyone then decides to crown Macbeth. The level 4 and above comes from saying that Malcolm and Donalbain, those are the names of his sons, appear wise and appear very measured, as they believe there's daggers in men's smiles. I love that metaphor. I would zoom in on that metaphor, and I would say that actually, again, it's dramatic irony, isn't it? We know that they're right, and we respect them, and we see them as wise. And the weather is often used in the play to symbolise chaos, so that storm And storms keep coming up. So we know the witches have said in thunder, lightning, or in rain. We know this idea of chaos is coming through from the weather from Shakespeare. So Shakespeare's using the weather as a tool to explore the chaos that Macbeth is causing to his country. Point 7. Macbeth then starts to worry about Banquo's prophecy. And that prophecy was that he will be father to a line of kings, which means that Macbeth isn't going to pass on his crown. Banquo's children will inherit his crown. Now, we don't know how this is yet. There's loads of ways that could happen. And it could just mean that Malcolm doesn't have children. Or maybe Malcolm does have a child and that child marries Fleance, for example, and then they have a child. There's loads of ways that it could be passed on, but Banquo hasn't had to do anything. He's just going to be the father to a line of kings. So, Shakespeare shows us that Macbeth is really insecure. And he's never happy with the power that he gets, because now he's starting to think, well, hold on, I'm king now. I've got to kill Banquo because his kids are going to become kings and they're going to take the crown from me. So he starts to consider killing Banquo and killing Banquo's son, Fleance. Now, Macbeth's insecurities are linked to manhood, as fathering an heir was necessary for kings. Obviously, we all remember the story of Henry VIII, who kept marrying and remarrying in order to get a son. So that really does show this sort of insecure nature of Macbeth. And Macbeth's fears are shown. Sorry, that should say fears, but I don't want to re-record this because we've got tomorrow's exam coming up. Macbeth's fears are shown when he says fruitless crown, with fruitless symbolising his lack of children. So again, you think about it like a tree that can't bear fruit. So trees have fruit that come from them. Men are meant to have children, kings are meant to have children that come from them. So that idea of the fruitless crown shows that he's actually really insecure about the fact that he hasn't had a child or a living child yet to pass the crown on to. Then we have point 8. So the basics of point 8. Macbeth has Banquo killed, which shows that he has no loyalties anymore. He murders his best friend. So not only has he murdered the king, he's murdered his best friend. There's no loyalty there. Macbeth doesn't manage to kill Banquo's son, Fleance, so that makes him very paranoid. Now, Fleance is Banquo's son, so that means that Banquo could still be the father to a line of kings. Then, just after this happens, Banquo's ghost appears to Macbeth, which could symbolise that he's feeling quite guilty. And that's an example of Macbeth's madness. The level 4 and above comes from the fact that Banquo's ghost sits in Macbeth's seat. That's really interesting because that again symbolises Macbeth's insecurities. He sees Banquo sit in his seat, and therefore that sort of shows how he's worried that Banquo is going to take his place, or at least Banquo's line, his sons, his grandsons, will take his place. So it shows that Macbeth is really insecure in his power and he doesn't feel that security. And this sort of builds up this picture of Macbeth as a very insecure man. Slide 9. Point 9. Macbeth returns to the witches. Now again, that shows that he trusts evil. We can't trust him. They tell him to beware Macduff, that Banquo will be the father of a line of kings still, and that no man born of woman will harm him. And that makes Macbeth overconfident. Macbeth is also shown to rely on the evil witches, so we don't trust him. Now, level 4 and above comes from the fact that the prophecies are deliberately misleading. So we remember back to that metaphor, to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths. And we find out later that all of these prophecies were half-truths. Beware Macduff, but no man born of woman can harm you. That comes up later because it actually turns out Macduff wasn't traditionally born of woman. He was born by C-section. So we can see here how all these prophecies lead him to his downfall. Now, Macbeth is shown to be foolish because this directly leads to Macduff's revenge. If he did not kill Macduff's family, Macduff wouldn't have had the need to go after him so passionately. So Macbeth, in murdering Macduff's family and believing in the witches' prophecies, he leads to his own downfall here. Slide 10, and we are almost there. I promise there's only 13 of these. Macbeth kills Macduff's family. So immediately, that's the first thing he does. He hears, beware Macduff, and he says, that's it, I'm killing his entire family. Macduff is in England and he's showing that patriotism. So patriotism means the love for your country. He's showing that because he's convincing Malcolm to come back, which means Macduff has a lot of loyalty to the rightful king. By rightful, I mean Duncan should have passed his crown on to Malcolm. So it is really important actually that the right line of kings is passed on to. So by that, what I mean is each king should pass on to his son, and that's sort of the line that they believe is chosen by God. So he worries about Macbeth, and he actually says, "New widows howl, new orphans cry." Now, those word choices of widows and orphans are really important because actually they're some of the most vulnerable people in society. They're women with no husbands to protect them, and they are children with no parents to protect them. And actually, when Macduff says that, he's really showing to us how terrible Macbeth has been as a ruler, which again shows his lack of leadership and really shows how different he is to Duncan, who was really generous and kind, and people fought for him. So Malcolm doesn't trust him, and who can blame him? Because obviously they know that it's possibly an inside job, that their father has been killed by another noble. And so he tries to trick him and he says, "I'm a horrible person, I'm greedy, and you shouldn't trust me as a king." Now, the reason he does this is because he thinks if he listens to all of this and still wants me as a king, he's probably trying to get me to go back to Scotland so Macbeth can murder me. But if he gives up, then he's probably not trying to get me back for Macbeth to murder me. And Macduff does give up. He does say, "I just want my country to have a good king, and that's not you." And that's when Malcolm actually says, "Hold on, I've been lying this whole time. And actually, I am a good person. I just wanted to make sure that I could trust you." Where we got our level 4s and above coming from is the fact that Malcolm is learning from his father's mistakes. He's not being too trusting. Duncan trusted Macbeth, but Malcolm's being more careful with that. Now, Malcolm then becomes a very wise ruler in the eyes of the audience. So he wasn't just running away and being a coward. Actually, it's revealed that he's gone to England, he's got this army behind him, and he is going to go back and fight for his country. So we do like him, and we see him juxtapose Macbeth and sort of go back for the right reasons and be a good person here. And Macduff is shown to be a really tragic character here. He's a man who loses his family. And there are two really important loves for men at this time, and two things that they need to protect. One is their country, and one is their family, their wife and their children. And so we root for him. We want him to win at this point. We want him to get that revenge because he's done what's right for his country, but in the process he's lost his wife and his children, which makes him a very tragic character. So slide 11, we then see Macbeth is ready for war, but Lady Macbeth is going mad. She keeps trying to wash blood from her hands, and if we remember at the start, that's what Macbeth was trying to do. So really it just shows that Lady Macbeth is not following what happened before. She's washing blood from her hands, she's saying she can't get rid of it, and that symbolises how guilty she feels. She ends up killing herself, but Macbeth actually doesn't care. He sort of just grazes over it, says that she would have died eventually. He's not really bothered by it, and that really shows that he's not capable of loving anything anymore. He just wants to keep his crown. Now, where we'll get our 4 and above, Lady Macbeth's madness shows that role reversal that I was talking about earlier. And Macbeth's lack of care towards her juxtaposes the beginning. He called her his dearest partner of greatness at the start, and he is now showing that all his desire, all his love, all his power is disappearing, and actually the only thing that he truly loves is his crown now, and he's really struggling to hold on to that. So all his power's disappearing as well. Lady Macbeth was the brains. Lady Macbeth was the person who created a lot of the plots, and he's lost her now. So 12, Malcolm has convinced Macduff to be a man and take revenge, and he says it's the manly thing to do. Macduff enters the castle whilst Macbeth is fighting some other men, and is very overconfident when he meets Macduff because he actually says, "No man born of woman can harm me." And that is when Macduff reveals that sort of plot twist there, where he says that he was actually untimely ripped from his mother's womb, which is an old-fashioned way of saying a C-section, which means he was born by an operation, not by normal childbirth. And that is the moment when Macbeth actually kind of realizes that all the prophecies were misleading, and now he's in a lot of trouble. So revenge is very favourable in this part of the play. And it's presented in that way that we are, again, as I said before, we like Macduff. We are rooting for Macduff. And we are also rooting for Malcolm, because they've both lost the most important things to them. They've lost their families, and Macduff should think the king is one of the most important people to him as well. It's having that loyalty to the crown, and he's lost his king as well. So Macbeth's downfall was foreshadowed by the prophecies because they were conflicting. If you remember, I did say a few slides back that the prophecy said that no one can harm him, but he should beware Macduff. So that was sort of foreshadowing that actually you can't trust what they're saying, because what they're saying doesn't make sense. And that proves that when Banquo said they will tell us truths to win us to our harm, they were correct, because Macduff technically wasn't born of woman. But at the time, that seemed almost impossible, because C-sections weren't common like they are now. So actually, that shows that Banquo was right all along. 13, and the last slide, is the last point in the play that we want to talk about. Macbeth is killed, and Malcolm honours the men who fought with him, which shows that he's a much better ruler than Macbeth, because he's actually honouring them. He's giving them new titles. He's sort of expressing his gratitude towards them. So Malcolm is really shown to be the rightful king, the good ruler, the one that we trust, the one that we like. And he restores all that order at the end. Then we've got the level 4 and above. Shakespeare is clearly supporting the divine right of kings, which is that we always have a rightful king chosen by God. And actually by doing this at the end, he's showing that the rightful king will always be restored. And the play started off with the death of a traitor, and it ends with the death of a traitor, which is a cyclical structure. And again, we started with the rightful king on the throne, we end with the rightful king on the throne. All that chaos in between meant nothing. So Macbeth's quest for power actually means nothing. And so that's really interesting again from Shakespeare. So these are all 13 points that I would go through for the play that I would say are the key plot points that we want to remember for tomorrow. Please like and subscribe, and have a look at our other videos for the literature exams. Thank you.